Hi guys, thanks for listening. Thank you as well to those of you who donate to the Patreon account. I've launched a campaign to raise funds to buy a new iMac. My current computer has been in use for over 8 years, and it is affecting my ability to create new content. As previously stated, my Patreon account can be found at www.patreon, that's patreon.com/leader1, LEADERONE. For those of you who would prefer to make a one-time single donation, there is also the option to send money to my PayPal account. The email address to send it to is Morgan Rector, my last name spelled RECTOR, 331, Morgan Rector 331 at hotmail.com. Remember, any amount is fine. If $1 one time is all you wish to donate, it would be gratefully accepted. Thank you for all your support, whatever forms it has taken. Enjoy the show. Welcome to Human Monsters. Location, Vancouver, Washington. Offender, Westley Allan Dodd. Occupation, sex offender. September 2nd, 1989. Westley Allan Dodd lay in his bed late at night. It was a hot summer night, but a fever from within burned clear through his heart and mind. He was naked. He masturbated in a fury as he recalled incidents when he molested children. He kept a diary that contained accounts of the most private parts of his life. The entry for this evening noted that he was unable to sleep because of an irrepressible and insatiable erection. The only way to cure himself of this priapic state was to murder a young boy. This was a bona fide addiction. The hunt had already begun. On the day in question, he discovered Vancouver's David Douglas Park. It was conveniently located, so he wouldn't have to burn through innumerable gallons of gas in search of victims. He canvassed the park carefully, drinking in every detail, from the topographical layout to the spot most likely to be frequented by visitors. He observed that the east end of the park was the most isolated area. It was visited most infrequently by the public. Nevertheless, unsupervised children with an appetite for adventure were sure to wander over to this area to satisfy their curiosity. He waited from 6:10 to 6:40 p.m. 3 young boys explored the area where he waited. He fantasized about raping and murdering all 3 boys. He also entertained the idea of abducting them so he could quote-unquote play with them first. Ever the sadist, he would make sure to taunt and humiliate them. Bullies had done this to Dodd while he was growing up, and after costing him his dignity and self-esteem, he was determined that somebody would pick up the tab. Dodd's game consisted of molesting and raping the children and capping it off by murdering them. He would serve them an early demise with a side of torture. Those boys were lucky. Westley Dodd lost his nerve and returned home. When Dodd wasn't sleeping or masturbating, he devoted his free time to a photo album he was working on. It was labeled categorically P-1. There he wrote instructions on pages that preceded a series of photos. P stood for pictures taken by other photographers. Some were new, some older, and some categorized as art. C consisted of photos taken of children in the nude. They posed for him, but he did not have physical sexual contact with them. V. These photos contained images of children being molested. Dodd trusted them to refrain from reporting the violations. Dodd was seen in some of the images. M stood for photos of children whose involvement in sexual assault was elicited through intimidation or force. Either way, the outcome was murder. In several of the photos labeled art was a recurring motif of religious faith and/or heresy. Christian art was placed in the background. It consisted of images of Joseph and Mary with the Christ child, Virgin and child, and other related themes. Its ornamental utility was known only to Dodd. Satisfied with the P section, Dodd wrote an entry in his diary. In it, he expressed a desire to photograph his child victims with video and Polaroid cameras. He would only document certain cases within 4 months, or whenever he had the means to purchase the equipment. Having finished with the diary, he placed it in a briefcase along with a photo album and stored it underneath his bed. He followed up by masturbating, followed by an hour of sleep. After he woke, he masturbated again. He was so possessed by his diabolical desires that he became an incurable insomniac. The next morning, Dodd returned to David Douglas Park. His aspiration was to spend 5 hours lying in wait to catch a victim in his web. For a time, he was undecided about his strategy. Would he rape and torture them at the park, or kidnap them and bring them back to his apartment? Pondering the possibilities, he wrote in his diary right before leaving for the park, "If I can get it home, I'll have more time for various types of rape, rather than just one quickie before the murder." He decided that he would act in a manner that was consistent with the demands of every individual encounter. If a boy was compliant, he would take him back to his apartment. Should a boy resist, he would rape and kill him where he found him and flee. He didn't have much luck spotting opportunities for easy victims, and he returned home at 2 o'clock to have lunch. He returned to the park, only to leave again at 4 p.m. Dodd decided that he wasn't adequately prepared for his hunt. He assembled his hunting gear. This consisted of long shoestrings, a large ace bandage, and a 6-inch fish fillet knife. The bandage would be used to attach the knife to his leg. He would bind his victims using the shoelaces. He would also use them to choke his victims. September 4th, Labor Day. Westley Dodd returned to David Douglas Park. He decided it would be best to sexually abuse and murder the children at his apartment, since the corpse of a dead child in the park would lead to close observation by law enforcement. He considered the park a more ideal spot to target children than a river he frequented in Richland, which was located in eastern Washington. It was his favorite spot to molest children and expose himself to them. Westley Dodd was on the prowl in David Douglas Park. 2 boys, brothers named Billy and Cole, were riding their bikes along a dirt path. Dodd walked to the middle of the path and blocked it. The boys were nonplussed, but didn't voice their displeasure. He ordered them to get off their bikes. They complied. Dodd said, "I want you 2 to come with me." Billy said, "Why?" Dodd said, "Because I told you to. You can bring your bikes if you want." Dodd and the boys walked on. They passed a couple of teenagers. Dodd told the boys not to speak to them. Once the teenagers walked away, he asked Billy and Cole their names and ages. Their ages exceeded his preferences, but he wasn't willing to renege on the vow he made to himself to do as he pleased with them. They walked off the trail and into a more densely wooded area. The boys laid their bikes down. Dodd led them up a hill into trees and bushes. Once there, they would have been unseen by passers-by. Satisfied that they were invisible to the world, he ordered Billy and Cole to stand back to back. Billy complied and raised no objections, but Cole kept asking Dodd what the purpose of it all was. Dodd tied their wrists together tightly. Having secured them against release, he ordered both boys to stand facing him. He knelt before them. Dodd's breathing became labored. He said, "One of you has to let me pull down your pants." Billy said, "Him," looking in the direction of his brother. Billy was seized with terror. He began making whining sounds and started to cry. Once again, Cole said, "Why?" Dodd told Cole that he wanted to perform fellatio on him. Cole said, "Will it hurt?" Dodd said, "No." Cole said, "Okay." Dodd was more attracted to Billy because he was younger. He also considered him to be, quote-unquote, prettier than Cole. Still, he was concerned that if he forced himself on him, Billy would cry out and scream, thereby attracting attention from outsiders. Dodd was now fully aroused. He pulled Cole's shirt up. He slid his fingers down under Cole's shorts and underpants. He pulled them down to his knees. He started to fondle him. Molestation did not satisfy his savage breast any more. He filleted Cole. Cole said, "Why are you doing this to us?" Dodd said, "Because I have to do it. I'll let you go in a little bit." Dodd performed oral sex on Billy. He enjoyed it more while performing it on Billy. Cole and Billy became increasingly more agitated and scared. At last, Dodd stopped. He looked up at Billy. He said to him, "I want you to do that to me." Billy started crying. Dodd turned to Cole. He said, "You have to do something else." Both of the boys told Dodd that they were hungry and expected at home, or else their father would be angry. Hoping to calm them, Dodd instructed them to tell their father they were lost. Dodd forced both boys down on their knees. He pulled Cole's pants down. With the boys still tied to each other, he realized it would be difficult to get them to serve him as he wanted. He had to cut them loose if there was any hope of making his fantasies a reality. He pulled his knife out from his pant leg and cut the shoelaces. He pocketed the shoelace, realizing it had the potential to incriminate him. Billy offered to go and tell their father they would be late. Dodd said, "You can go in a couple of minutes. I'm almost done." Dodd made Billy lean back on his heels so that he would be easy to catch if he intended to run. He turned back to Cole. Cole stood with his exposed buttocks to Dodd. Dodd unzipped and pulled his jeans and underpants down. His genitals were now exposed. To achieve an erection, Dodd inserted himself between Cole's legs and simulated intercourse. He could not get it up. He gave up. Mr. Soft Serve was frustrated by this. He made a mental note to himself to take it slowly next time. The pressure made him soft. Cole turned to face Dodd. Dodd said, "There's just one more thing." He brandished the knife. The boys shrank back in horror. Petrified, Cole said, "Please don't kill us, mister. We won't tell." Dodd thrusted his blade deep into Billy's stomach. Cole tried to leave, but Dodd was too quick for him. He missed his stomach, but cut him deep and on his side. Billy grabbed his stomach where he was cut and began to run. He heard traffic noise in the distance and headed toward it. Cole was writhing in pain on the ground. Panicking, Dodd stabbed him again. He stabbed him a third time in his chest. Cole grew still. Dodd ran in the same direction Billy was headed. He caught up with him and grabbed his right arm. Billy said, I'm sorry. Dodd stabbed him in his lower side. He cut him in his left shoulder. Billy fell to the ground. Uncertain of Billy's face, Dodd ran away. He didn't hide the bodies for fear that he would get his DNA on their flesh or clothing. Dodd walked back to the site where Cole's body remained. Cole was lying on his back. His head was tilted to the left. His eyes were open. His arms were motionless by his side. He was drenched in blood. There were no signs of movement. Dodd left with a blood-soaked left hand. Later that day, Dodd wrote about the experience in his diary. He was shaken up by what he had wrought. The image of Cole's lifeless body covered in blood, and Billy apologizing profusely left a stain on his psyche. He later masturbated to his images of Billy and Cole from both before and after their deaths. He threw the knife into a dumpster the next day. Billy Neer's body was discovered by a local teen. Billy was airlifted to a trauma center, but despite the best efforts of paramedics, he didn't make it to the hospital. He was pronounced dead on arrival. He had no ID on him, so he was classified as a junior doe. Using photographs provided by the boy's father, Billy and Cole Neer were positively identified, and their father was notified that they were not missing, but murdered. Their father, Claire, was so distraught by his loss that he moved out of Vancouver. He had a third son who was dispatched to live with a family member. Billy and Cole were sent to North Dakota to be buried. Claire became far less trusting and increasingly cynical about the world. As he once told reporters, for kids, they need to know that they should listen to their parents. Something's going to happen if they don't. And they should trust nobody. And parents, keep an eye on your kids. Don't let them wander off too far. Losing one is bad. Losing two, well, all I've got left is my baby. Composite sketches were made of a suspicious man 2 witnesses saw at the park that day, but when they were shown to citizens, nobody recognized the figure in the picture. As the Vancouver Police Department chased one dead-end lead after another, it was still hunting season for Westley Allan Dodd. He would have to change the territory since police and concerned citizens were combing David Douglas Park for evidence. Parents would not allow their children to play there. Reflecting on the murder of the Neer brothers, Dodd wrote in his diary that he, quote, must spend more time with the boy or girl before killing, and that he would ensure that, quote, the body is hidden better, end quote. He studied maps of locations in Vancouver, Portland, and Oregon's Columbia River. He marked public parks and school playgrounds, any place that promised isolation and the presence of children. He read the newspapers to find out how much progress police were making in the Neer case. He clipped articles and put them in his notebook. He took his so-called diary of death from his briefcase. The following is an entry from September 6th, 1989. While most of my future victims will die in various ways, I also hope to have some long relationships with children as well. I'd like to make some child porno movies. I also hope to get before and after photos of my sex murder victims as well. When crotch fucking the ones to die, I'll clean the kid real well before killing and deposit my sperm in something to remove it as forensic evidence. When butt fucking, I'll use a well-greased rubber. May fuck either way before or after they die, depending on whether they're bloody or not. Some of them will also be forced to perform certain acts on me. I think I got more of a high out of killing them than molesting. I had fantasized previously of my stomach against a boy's back, my arms around him, and over his arms. He is blindfolded so as not to see the knife I'm holding to a point just below his breastbone. Just read, you'll see what actually does occur. Just writing this and reading previous story about my first murder makes my cock stiff. I must find it sexual. I'll note that the Oregonian is a morning paper and the Columbian an afternoon paper. The news articles will be numbered in the order they appeared. The same number on different articles indicate they all came from same edition of paper. Number 1 is 2 different articles, being about the killing, then about the boys' lives. Police don't even know Cole was molested, even though his pants were down. Maybe that's the way to go. Leave no indication of a rape? Nah. Too much I want to do would be obvious. Dodd would usually masturbate himself to a climax after writing these entries. He would relive the murders and rapes of the near boys. That, or maybe he would think of another child he molested or exposed himself to. He would get in bed for the night afterward. The only time Dodd was rattled by media coverage of the near murders was when a composite sketch appeared in Vancouver's daily newspaper, The Columbian. While not a precise replication, the illustration did closely resemble Dodd. He was alarmed. He decided to limit his appearances in public. He considered changing his appearance by wearing a hat or some other item that would obscure his appearance. On September 12th, 2 more composite sketches were released to the media. Neither of them resembled Dodd, and he was relieved. As he planned his next hunt, he remained largely incognito when he walked the streets. Contemplating the new possibilities that awaited him, he jotted down some ideas he came up with. Just had a brilliant thought. I must purchase an audio cassette recorder. That way, I'll later be able to log exact words and reaction descriptions during a rape, molest, operation, murder, etc. That will do until I can afford the more expensive camcorder with sound. Kidnapped victims will not be told anything until I can do it on tape. In surgery with live patients, whether they are conscious or not, they'll have to be tied down. Hands loosely overhead to keep them from coming into the way. To prevent bouncing, tied tightly to table around chest and waist, possibly abdomen also. Tie at knees to maintain legs at desired location, and at ankles to keep feet down. May do surgery with or without pain relief or sedation. Dodd rendered a crude illustration of a quote-unquote torture rack, which would be made of wood. He hadn't gotten around to building it because he was so busy prowling for children to sexually abuse. Below the illustration he wrote the words, "Live kids." He included the following in point form. Can obtain unconsciousness by keeping them awake late, then giving several sleeping pills. Murder methods. Fastest, stabbing. Slicing throat, too messy. Slowest, starvation, thirst. Slow, bleeding to death. Blood could be caught in jars. Medium, suffocation, drowning. Uses, possibilities. 1. Drown. 2. Hang by neck. 3. plastic bag over face. 4. Strangle, with hands or rope. 5. Pillow tight over face. 6. Hog tie and tape over nose and mouth. 7. Amputate privates a little at a time until bled dead. 8. Stab. 9. Slice throat. Too messy. 10. No food and or water. 11. Drugs. Full bottle sleeping pills. 12. Start experimental surgery on live, conscious, blindfolded, tied down victims. For my first incident, knife was best choice as my kill would have to be quick and easy for the chosen location. Decided that this next incident would have a cleaner kill, probably choking to have a clean body. I want a better location for this incident, so I feel more comfortable and can take more time for various types of sex before and after killing the child. One possibility is kidnapping. At home, I'd have all the time I need. One thing for certain is for this incident, the sex will take longer, and death will be something different than stabbing. In the next passage, Dodd wrote about the time when he made a pact with Satan, though he also pointed out that he wasn't serious about it. He explored in further detail the aspects of his crimes, for which he hoped Satan would provide assistance. I bought a set of X-Acto knives and tweezers last night, giving me the necessary tools for my exploratory surgeries. I've now asked Satan to provide me with a 6 to 10-year-old boy to make love to, suck and fuck, play with, photograph, kill, and do my exploratory surgery on. On my legs and groin, I wrote, I now have needed tools for surgery, and I took a nude nap from 4 o'clock to 5:30 and dozed until about 6:30 this afternoon. I now ask Satan that this boy be an easy target, meaning, due to heat from incident number 1, I can't do much hunting for fear of being noticed by a witness. If the conditions on the previous page are met, and I remain sexually satisfied through contact, pictures, or tapes, then I will gladly turn my soul over to Satan. Dodd also wrote about a desire to kidnap a boy and keep him as a sex slave until he aged out, and Dodd would dispose of him and find a fresh one. Part of the fantasy consisted of him tying up the boy and leaving him confined at home as he went about his workday. He contemplated his plans for surgeries. Would like to videotape the exploratory as well as future operations, to use as future reference, to show patience, what I'll be doing, or to terrify victims if I wish to do so. But at this time, 9/24/89, 8:15 p.m., I don't think I want to merely terrify them. 10:30 p.m. in surgery on live patients, with or without patient's consent. They'll be tied down. I could induce unconsciousness by keeping them up late, then giving them several sleeping pills, which would allow me to do things that may otherwise be painful for them. 11:15 p.m. Thoughts of getting a child or two for a period of time that could be taught Lucifer's ways and be an assistant to Lucifer through me until they're able to work on their own or get too old and are used as a possible sacrifice. 11:45 p.m. The last couple of days I've really been wanting a child. I hope something happens soon. October 29th. Westley Dodd was standing in the playground of Richmond School. He spotted some young boys playing. 2 of them looked to be 8 or 9 years old. One was 12 years old. One boy who looked like he was 4 or 5 years old was playing on a structure known as the volcano, which was a mound with a built-in slide. After having exhausted the volcano of all of its recreational possibilities, the boy began to play by himself. Dodd walked over to the boy. He said, "Hi." The boy looked up at him and smiled. Dodd was very pleased with the blond-haired boy's appearance. Dodd said, "Would you like to have some fun and make some money?" The boy was capricious at first, but then decided against it. He shook his head. Dodd said, "Come on, this will be fun." Dodd extended his hand, and the boy took it. They walked off the school's grounds unseen by the other kids. Dodd said, "We're going to get in my car." The boy said, "I don't want any money." Dodd picked him up and held him up to eye level. He said, "We're still going. Let's go ask your dad if you can go with me." Mentioning the boy's father placated the boy somewhat. Dodd put him in the driver's seat and drove away from the school. The boy quickly realized they were not headed for his house. He said, "I live the other way." Dodd said, "We're going to my house and play some games. Just do what I tell you and I promise I won't hurt you. But you'll have to be quiet when we get there. My landlady doesn't like little kids." Along the way, Dodd asked the boy his name. He said his name was Lee and that he was 4 years old. Lee became worried that his brother, who was playing at Richmond School at the time of the abduction, would begin to worry about him. He cried a couple of times. Dodd held his hand and assured him that they were going to have fun playing some harmless games. They arrived at Dodd's home at 1:30 p.m. There was nobody around to witness Dodd bringing the boy into the building. Dodd picked Lee up, but Lee resisted. He said, "I can walk." He followed Dodd voluntarily into the apartment complex. Elsewhere, Robert L. Assailey called 911 to report that his 4-year-old son, Lee Joseph Assailey, was missing. Lee's brother Justin, who was present at the playground of Richmond School, was distraught. He was able to describe to police the man he saw speaking to Lee before he was kidnapped. He said he was a Caucasian male, approximately 32 to 38 years old, roughly 5'10", with a svelte build. He had short brown hair, a mustache, and 2 or 3 days of stubble. He wore a blue baseball cap with red lettering on the front. He wore an outfit of blue jeans and a blue shirt. A police investigation began in earnest. Officers used every available resource to search the area. By nightfall, there was no sign of Lee anywhere in the area. His family was frantic. Westley Dodd sat Lee down on his bed. He took a Polaroid of him. He reached down underneath the bed and brought his briefcase out. After opening it, he pulled out his pink photo album bearing the label Family Memories. Dodd sat next to Lee and thumbed through an assortment of photos. The people in the images were naked. Lee had little interest in seeing it. Dodd put the album away. Speaking with a calm and soothing voice, he told Lee to remove his clothes. Lee ignored him. Dodd did not allow Lee's recalcitrance to daunt him. He repeated his order while pulling off one of Lee's shoes. Lee still did not cooperate, so Dodd removed the other shoe. Continuing along this trajectory, he removed both of Lee's socks. From there, he proceeded to pull off his jacket and shirt. Dodd pressured Lee to remove the rest of his clothes. Lee removed his pants and underwear. Dodd ordered Lee to lay back on the bed. Flat on the bed now, Dodd tied ropes around Lee's wrists and ankles. The ropes were attached to every corner of the bed. Dodd took another photo of Lee. He released him from the restraints afterward. Dodd took off all of his clothes. He molested Lee for the next hour, which included fondling and performing oral sex on him. Once Dodd was finished with this, he allowed Lee to put his clothes back on. He wrote in his notebook, "Lee's happy and cheerful." They watched Yogi Bear cartoons on TV while Dodd placed the photos of Lee in his photo album. Dodd said to Lee, "Do you want to spend the night with me?" Lee said, "No, my brother might miss me." "Nah, your brother is probably having fun too." After a few moments of contemplation, Dodd said to Lee, "I'm sorry I don't have any toys for you to play with. Would you like to go to Kmart? I'll buy you a He-Man or a RoboCop toy, and then we can go to McDonald's for a burger if you'll spend the night with me." Given these conditions, Lee agreed to stay overnight. During their shopping trip at Kmart, Lee began to cry. He was thinking of his father and brother. Dodd tried to calm him down, but Lee insisted on returning home. At one point, a store employee asked what the problem was. Dodd told them that he was caring for his nephew, who wanted to go home but would have to wait. The employee was satisfied with this explanation and went away. Dodd bought Lee a RoboCop toy. Lee calmed down after this. They had a meal at McDonald's, and Dodd agreed to let Lee play on their playground. 6:30 p.m. Westley and Lee were back in Dodd's apartment. While Lee continued to play with his new toy, Dodd was formulating plans on how to kill him. As he wrote in his diary, he suspects nothing now. We'll probably wait until morning to kill him. That way, his body will still be fairly fresh for experiments after work. I'll suffocate him in his sleep when I wake up for work, if I sleep. Lee became bored with his toy. Dodd showed him his photo album again. It still failed to impress or fascinate Lee. He told Dodd he needed to go to the bathroom. Dodd kept the door ajar. As he put it in his diary, peeked through a crack in the door as he was taking a shit. 9 p.m. Dodd showed Lee his photo album again. His attempt to groom Lee for more sexual activity wasn't working. Lee did wish to see his own pictures again. However, he told Dodd he didn't want to pose for more photos. Regarding this moment, Dodd wrote in his diary, "Little does he know that in about 20 hours, I'll be taking photos of a dead 4-year-old naked boy." 9:45 p.m. Lee was asleep in bed. 10 p.m. Both Dodd and Lee were naked. Dodd fondled Lee for the next hour. He awaited the 11 o'clock news in hopes that Lee's disappearance would be featured. In the meantime, he fantasized about the many ways in which he could kill the boy. As he wrote in his diary, "He'll either be choked, strangled, or suffocated. I don't want to leave marks on his neck, but it must be quick and quiet." As far as cadaver disposal went, he decided to store Lee's body on an upper shelf in his closet. He would hide it by placing pillows and a sleeping bag in front. He did this to ensure that if his landlady entered the unit while he was gone, she would not find the corpse. Dodd didn't get much sleep that night, not with a naked boy for him to do what he wanted. He spent much of the pre-dawn hours molesting Lee. At about 2 a.m., Dodd pulled Lee on top of him. Dodd logged this in his diary, writing, "Lee's belly to mine, my cock in his crotch." He slept on top of me for half an hour as I rubbed his back and butt. 3:15 a.m. Lee woke. Dodd said to him, "I'm going to kill you in the morning." Lee said, "No, you're not." Lee was petrified. He began to cry. When he really began to wail, Dodd reassured him that it was an idle threat. This was enough for Lee, and he went back to sleep. 5:30 a.m. Dodd decided that it was now time to kill Lee. He crawled over to him and leaned on his left side. He pinned Lee's left wrist with his left hand. While weighing the boy down, Dodd choked him with his right hand. Lee woke. He struggled aggressively to free himself of Dodd's iron grip. He did manage to pry his legs free. Dodd squeezed Lee's neck tighter. It wasn't as easy as he thought it would be, and after exhausting himself of the strength in one hand, he choked Lee with both. He squeezed Lee's throat with all his might for 15 seconds. Lee stopped struggling and settled into inertia. After waiting 20 seconds, Dodd blew air into Lee's mouth to see if he could be revived. At first, Lee did not respond, but after about 20 seconds he began to gasp. Dodd choked him again for about a minute until the boy became still once again. When he released him, Lee gasped for air again and opened his eyes. Frustrated and stressed, Dodd grabbed a rope he kept by his bed. He wrapped it around Lee's neck. He tightened it and pulled Lee into an upright position. He watched as Lee's chest heaved, unable as it was to draw in and retain breath. As he held the rope tightly with his right hand, he placed his left hand underneath Lee's buttocks and picked him up. He carried him to his closet and dangled the boy by the rope as he moved some hanging clothes to one side. He tied Lee to the clothes bar and left him hanging. As he put it in his diary, he did this, quote, so I wouldn't get tired from the grip and maybe let him breathe again. Dodd left Lee hanging in the closet for about 10 minutes. 5:45 a.m. Lee was dead. Dodd cut the rope from which the boy was hung and placed him on his bed. He tried to perform oral sex on Lee, but he gave up before long. He checked the boy's vital signs. No breathing, no heartbeat. He placed the body in his closet, concealing it with pillows and a sleeping bag. He soon left for work, but not without noting in his diary that, I'll do more after work. In the evening, Westley Dodd read about the disappearance of Lee Assailey in the Oregonian newspaper. After doing this, he sat down and wrote the following entry in his diary. 4:50 p.m. We'll now go take a leak and take the naked body of 4-year-old Lee Joseph Assailey out of the closet. I'll log everything as I go now. The paper article labeled The Oregonian 10/30/89 was on page 5 of section B, like it was no major deal he's missing. Looks like a perfect kidnapping. 5:05 p.m. Now getting Lee out of closet. Oh yeah, I knew for sure this morning he was dead. I had heard of muscles relaxing, and it's normal to go potty after dying. He peed on me twice as I hid his body in the closet, and once more on the shelf in the closet. 5:10 p.m. He is rather gross looking, cold, stiff, and purple. 5:16 p.m. See photos number 8 and number 9. These photos show the position he's stuck in from being in a small closet area. 5:35 p.m. I'm going to go get some garbage bags now to put his bundled up body into. Then I'll figure out a place to dump the garbage. I'll wear gloves when handling the bags. No chance of fingerprints if someone discovers contents of the bag. 6:50 p.m. Now wearing gloves after shower to handle trash bags to put Lee in. Washed his underwear and shower. Will now go dump his naked body. 8 o'clock p.m. Home. Dumped. 7:30 p.m. On 10 to 30. November 1st, 1989. St. Elmo Abernathy went pheasant hunting at the Washington State Game Preserve, which is located near Vancouver Lake. He didn't catch any pheasants that day. Crestfallen, he headed back with his hunting dog. After walking only a few yards, his eye caught something unusual in the brush. He couldn't discern what it was at first. It resembled a large, lifelike doll. He was puzzled that someone would discard such a thing in such a location. He walked further to get a closer look. Abernathy was horrified when he realized that the figure was not a toy. It was all too real. It was a real human being, and a little boy at that. The boy was naked. His body was haphazardly camouflaged with floral debris. Abernathy got into his truck, drove to the nearest payphone, and called 911. When the police arrived and Abernathy led them to where the body lay, he was in tears. Later that day, officers John Cruz and Stan Sturba of the Portland Police Bureau's Identification Division positively identified the body as being Lee Joseph Assailey. After an officer imparted the bad news to Lee's father, he said, "If you find the guy, keep him away from me. A lot of people would like to kill him." A coroner determined that the official cause of death was strangulation. As the police were hard at work investigating the murder of Lee Assailey, Westley Dodd already came to a decision on how his next victim would die. He would suffocate him after tying him down. He wanted to add some kind of additional element to make it more exciting. He decided it was time to construct the torture rack he had dreamed about for so long. He bought some lumber and built the device. He was methodical, measuring and sawing with precision. When it was finished, he attached rope restraints at every corner, which would be used to keep the victim attached. There was another in the center to keep the victim's midsection positioned downward. As the torture rack fantasies took hold, he wrote a new entry in his diary. "Will be tied for a photo as number 2 was. Then, when finished, he'll be tied just one more time for another picture, but with a bag on his head this time. A plastic bag will be put over him and secured about the neck. As he suffocates to death, tied down, of course." Dodd got so worked up while visualizing scenarios of raping and killing boys with his torture rack that he masturbated non-stop into a climax. The next evening he added more to his diary regarding the methods of execution and torture he was devising. "Incident 3 will die maybe this way. He'll be tied down as Lee was in Incident 2. Instead of placing a bag over his head, as I had previously planned, I'll tape his mouth shut with duct tape. Then, when ready, I'll use a clothespin or something to plug his nose. That way I can sit back, take pictures, and watch him die, instead of concentrating on using my hands or the rope tied around his neck. That would also eliminate the rope burns on his neck, as Lee had in Incident 2. This is also better than the plastic bag, as I can clearly see his face and eyes now, as he dies, as well as get some pictures of a naked and dying boy. Electrocution also a good means for quick death." November 13th. Westley Dodd wrote in his diary about what he intended to accomplish in the future as a rapist and murderer of children. 4:40 p.m. Will now prepare ropes as I had for incident number 2, tied to bed and hidden under it, to use on victims as soon as wanted or needed. Needing only to tie loose rope ends to the victim, other ends already attached to bed or my rack, my wood framework built for this purpose. 4:45 p.m. I now ask Satan to guide me and provide or help me obtain a boy tonight. This one I'd like to keep a while, keeping him awake all night each night, so he'll sleep all day while I'm at work, tied and mouth taped shut to be on the safe side. I may only keep him 2 or 3 days, or even longer if it works out. I'll give him a haircut and buy a new set of clothes for him to change his appearance in case I take him out as I did Lee in number 2. I might even get 2 boys, perhaps a 6 or 7-year-old taking a 3 or 4-year-old to the toilet. In the case of 2 like this, the older or both would decide when I tire of them which was to die. Don't know if survivor or just a lone boy would die or be used to help get another boy home. We'll have to wait and see. I also want to do my medical experiments this time, once finished with sexual play on the bodies. Also hoping for more, better pictures. May also play spin the bottle or stripping games, especially with 2 boys. 5:25 p.m. Now going to Camus. We'll check out local parks before movie. A boy named Steve attended a screening of Honey, I Shrunk the Kids with his mother, sister, and his mother's boyfriend. The 4 sat in the midsection. Westley Allan Dodd took a seat at the rear of the theater to be as inconspicuous as possible, though he was late. 15 minutes after he arrived, Dodd saw a little boy leave the theater alone. Dodd got up immediately and walked toward the washroom. Steve entered the washroom. At the time, the boy Dodd followed was relieving himself. Dodd came across as harmless, smiling all the while. He courteously allowed Steve to use one of the stalls ahead of him. When the other boy departed, Dodd entered Steve's stall. He left the door slightly ajar. When Steve finished, Dodd blocked his exit. He said to him, "I'm going to take you outside. I'm not going to hurt you." Steve said, "I have to go back and see my mom. She's waiting for me." Dodd said, "No, you're going to come outside with me." Dodd picked Steve up and hoisted him over his left shoulder. Steve screamed while Dodd headed to the washroom door. Dodd was angry now. He loosened his grip on Steve enough to hit him with his free hand. He punched him in the chest as hard as he could. He put him back across his shoulder. One of the theater's co-owners, Kathy, was in the lobby and heard the commotion. She said to an employee, "Get in there, Paul, and see what's going on." What Paul saw when he entered the washroom was a man holding a small boy in what looked like a bear hug. The boy was screaming bloody murder. He kicked aggressively against the man who was carrying him. The man said to the boy, "Calm down, son, calm down." The man walked by Paul as if nothing out of the ordinary was going on. Paul assumed that the boy was the father's son and was being recalcitrant. When Dodd and Steve came out to the lobby, other staff were present, and they too assumed Dodd was Steve's father. When Steve saw that the theater staff were watching what was happening, he cried out to them, "Please help me, I don't know him, he's trying to hurt me." Kathy said to a couple of her employees, "Come on, we've got to follow him. Amanda, you call 911. When Tony and Kathy got outside, they looked one way and then the other. They saw the man running with the boy westbound down 4th Avenue. He disappeared around the corner onto Birch Street. The women followed until the boy came running back from around the corner. He was frightened and crying. He ran until he collided with Tony's legs. Steve pointed in Dodd's direction and said, "That man's trying to hurt me." Tony picked him up and brought him back inside the theater, where he was reunited with his mother, sister, and her boyfriend, William Ray Graves. After Graves was told about what happened and got a description of the man who abducted Steve, he ran out of the theater and down the sidewalk to Birch Street. He didn't see Dodd. He did see Kathy Asher, who was talking to a man named Bill Hoxie. Graves was informed by Hoxie that the man dropped Steve and ran to a yellow Pinto station wagon with wood grain sides. The man described the offender and gave him directions on how to find him. When Graves turned west onto Adams Street and crossed 6th Avenue, he saw the yellow Pinto. The car was lurching. Graves parked nearby and approached the Pinto. He said to the driver, "Looks like you're having car troubles here. Doesn't look so good. Want some help?" Dodd accepted this offer. Graves told him he could probably fix the problem and get the car moving again. He suggested moving the car to the lot across the street in front of a paper mill. As they pushed the car to the paper mill, Graves asked Dodd questions about where he had been that day without making it obvious that he knew what he had done to Steve. Once they got in the parking lot, Dodd opened the car's hood and examined the engine with his back to Graves. Graves was a construction worker considerably superior in size and strength to Dodd. Graves wrapped his arm around Dodd's neck and kept him in a tight chokehold. He grabbed Dodd's left wrist with his left hand and pulled it behind his back. Graves said to him, "This is it, you son of a bitch. You've been restrained, and we're going to the cops." Dodd said, "What's this all about?" "Why don't you tell me? Why don't you tell me why you hit the little boy?" "I haven't hurt anyone." "Well, then why were you downtown? Can you tell me that?" "I went to see the movie." "Oh yeah? Well then why did you leave before the movie even started?" "I was just tired, and I was going home." Graves lugged Dodd back to the movie theater. Once there, he pinned him against a wall and bound his hands behind him. After the police arrived, Westley Allan Dodd was positively identified as the suspect, and he was taken into custody. He was charged with kidnapping. Detective Doug Slider ran Westley Dodd's name through the National Crime Information Center's database to see if he had a criminal record. It turned out Dodd had been charged with kidnapping, indecent liberties, and lewd and lascivious conduct with a minor younger than 16. Detectives realized that Dodd's home address and the location of his workplace were close to where the Near Boys lived and where Lee Assailey's body was found. It occurred to them that the kidnapping Dodd was responsible for that day was just the tip of the iceberg in terms of his record of offending against children. After he was read his Miranda rights, Dodd agreed to be questioned by police without the representation of an attorney. Lieutenant C.W. Jensen and Dave Trimble were surprised by how willing Dodd was to discuss the kidnapping. After telling the story about how he met Steve, he admitted that it was his intention to molest him in the washroom. He thought better of it and decided it would be best to bring him outside. This was a lie. The investigators didn't yet know that he was responsible for the murders of the Near Boys and Lee Assailey. Dodd described what happened after he left the theater. "He was hollering, and I walked outside and went around the corner, then I let him go. I don't know why, but I let him go. I got to the car, started to drive off, and the car decided to break down on me again. I got caught. The guy offered to help me with the car and ended up pinning me and walked me back to the theater where they kept me until the police arrived." Trimble said, "How long have you been in Vancouver?" Dodd said, "About 4 months." He also mentioned living in Seattle. Trimble, "Where did you live prior to Seattle?" Dodd, "I was down in the Tri-Cities for about 2 years, and I lived in Idaho before that for a couple of years. I moved to Idaho just after I got out of the Navy, which was in '83. Had some trouble in Idaho and some counseling. Couldn't find work. Moved down to the Tri-Cities. That's where I went to high school. I had some friends down there. Started working, and my sister and brother-in-law had been trying to get me to move up to Seattle, so I moved up there and got into trouble again. Trimble. What kind of trouble? Dodd. I was arrested for investigation of attempted kidnapping. Was finally charged with attempted unlawful detainment, and I got 90 days time served and 1 year probation. Got some counseling again, kind of bounced around with the counselors there, and my ex-girlfriend came back to me. I ended up quitting my job and moved back to Yakima with her. She disappeared a week later, and that's when I moved down to Vancouver. Trimble. And that was about 4 months ago? Dodd. That's about 4 months ago, yeah. Trimble. Okay, where did you move to when you came here? Dodd. I first moved in with my dad. Trimble. How long did you live there? Dodd. I was there a little over a month. I had a couple of paychecks to pay rent and the deposit and everything, so I moved right away over Labor Day weekend. On Labor Day, I was tired from moving and didn't have a TV or anything, so I started thinking about molesting like I did in the past. Dodd clammed up. He had said too much. Mentioning Labor Day was a critical error. He described his past sex offenses. He said he had a serious problem with sexual deviancy and was in need of psychiatric help. Dodd claimed his history with deviant sexuality began on July 3, 1970. While his siblings were in hospital, he visited a cousin's house. Another relative was visiting, and all 3 boys were the same age. They were about to go swimming when the other 2 boys told Dodd to watch something. They pulled down their swimming trunks and touched their penises together. Dodd was shocked by this at the time, but he ended up doing the same thing with one of his cousins. Dodd would go skinny dipping in his family's swimming pool. As Dodd pointed out to the police, so I had, at age 9, had one sexual experience with 2 9-year-old boys and one sexual experience while alone. On another occasion, a neighbor girl showed Dodd and his sister her vagina. She declined to see his penis. Commenting on this, Dodd said, "The neighbor girl said that she'd seen it on boys before. This may explain why a lot of my future victims would be boys." He was teased and bullied by both girls and boys throughout middle and secondary school. He described his history as a sex offender. Things started out as flashing and got progressively worse until I tried to get a boy to go into an empty building with me 3 days before his 8th birthday. I hoped he would allow me to molest him, perform oral sex on him, and crotch fuck him, but I was prepared for a forced rape. Fortunately, he knew that something was up. I was found innocent of the charge against me, but was offered access to whom I believed is the best counselor in this type of business. Dodd would hurry home at the end of the school day so he could flash the other students walking by his house from a window. He did this 8 or 9 times throughout a period of about 3 months. He only flashed boys. On one occasion, the police were notified and came by the Dodd residence to question them about it. He stopped flashing from their house after that day. He decided that he would find more victims in other parts of town. As he recalled, "I decided to take my flashing on the road. That way, if they told, the police wouldn't know where I lived. I'd find a good boy or group of boys, then ride around the block. I'd pull my cock and balls out through my fly and hide them by pulling down my t-shirt. Then as I rode by the boys again, I'd pull up the shirt and say, 'Hey,' exposing myself. This happened 8 or 9 times. Dodd revealed what went down when he exposed himself to a group of 4 boys, 3 of them 9 years old, with the youngest being 4. One of the older boys yelled after him, "Do it again," while Dodd was riding away. Dodd described what happened next. I said, "I'll do it again if one of you do first." Right there on the sidewalk, the 4-year-old pulled down the front of his pants. He only exposed his groin, but wouldn't do it again. They all said, "Now, you again." I took them into their yard behind some shrubs and pulled down the front of my shorts. I wore no underwear on these trips. I said, Anyone want to touch it?" The 4-year-old did and said, "Yep, it's real." They all laughed, and the 4-year-old and 2 of the 9-year-olds agreed to meet me at a vacant field nearby that evening so I could do it again and show them some tricks, such as making it bigger, bouncing it without touching it, and making stuff come out. I told them I might even teach them how to do it, but they never showed up. That was the last time I ever flashed a kid. One had touched me, and that had given me a better feeling than just showing myself. I now wanted to be touched, not seen. The officers noticed that Dodd seemed to go into a trance as he told these stories. It was as if he traveled to some distant locale situated somewhere within the realm of fantasy. He wanted children to touch him, and he decided that when he spotted a group of 6 children, 3 boys and 3 girls in a playground, he decided that they would be the ones to be groomed into doing so. To quote Dodd, "I asked the kids if they wanted to play a game, and they did. They asked, 'What?' I told them to line up their backs to me, and that I'd put something into their hands one by one, and they'd have to guess what it was without looking. I gave them a rock, then an ink pen. Then I said, 'They'll have to hold the next one so it doesn't get broke.' I reminded them not to look, and let each one wrap their hand around my cock for 2 or 3 seconds. None of them knew what it was when I asked them. But one boy said he might know, that he'd try again. They each tried again, but still didn't know what it was. Afterward, I pointed to my now covered parts and said, 'This.' The one boy said, 'Yeah, I knew it.' I asked him if he'd go to a more private area and do it again, and he said he would if everyone else went, but the rest didn't agree. About 2 weeks later, he went on the prowl again. He couldn't find any boys, so he settled for 3 girls who were playing in a playground. They were 6 to 7 years old. One of them was topless, her shirt lying on the ground. He said to her, "Are you a boy or girl?" She said, "A girl." One of the other girls said to her, "He just wants to see your key-caw." After some negotiations, Dodd asked them if they wanted to see it. They said yes. To quote Dodd, I said, "I will if one of you will." All 3 girls agreed that the youngest one would drop her pants, but she got scared and started to run. I chased and caught her. She fell to the ground on her back. I got down on my knees, straddled her legs, and started to unsnap her pants. She started crying, so I let her go. A janitor came out of the school and scared Dodd off. A few days later, the girl he assaulted showed up at his house with her father. Dodd's father beat him afterwards. Westley gave up seeking physical contact from other children. It didn't matter to him what the gender of the victim was. Case in point, one day in 1976, a 9-year-old cousin was visiting Dodd's house. He played a guessing game with her that somehow ended in him placing his penis in her hand. He recalled what happened next. In the closet, I had her hold my dick for a few seconds. Then I had her pull on it as hard as she could. I had her feel my balls. Then I had an idea. I could touch a kid instead of just kids touching me. She agreed to pull her own pants down, provided he leave the closet door closed. She didn't want to give him a clear look at her vagina. In the dark, it would be somewhat obscured. He was satisfied with these conditions. He placed his hands on her hips and studied her outline in the darkness. Dodd described what happened next. I asked if I could touch it. She said, "Oh God," which was her favorite expression. I put my lips against her key-caw, which was the only name I knew it by, thanks to the girls at the school, and I blew on it. A few days later, when we were at her house, she told my sister and her 8-year-old brother what we'd done, but they didn't believe her. I said, "Let's do it again." She said, "Where?" "Right here, so we can show them so they'll believe us." She pulled down her pants. I said, "Lay on the end of the bed." She did, pants around her ankles, legs bent at the knees over the end of the bed. I helped her spread her legs out and got my first good, close look at a girl. I saw that she didn't wipe very good. There was a crusty film around her key-caw. I almost didn't do it, but decided it was that way when I did it in the dark closet too. My sister and her brother watched as I again blew out against her privates. She then helped me talk her brother into trying it. This was the first time that I had an 8-year-old cock in my mouth. I just blew it right back out. Later, alone with her brother, I put a hand down the front of his pants as I leaned over his shoulder from behind. I wanted to know what he felt like. He made me stop by saying he'd tell. I stopped. Dodd ran afoul of the law as a teen for another sex crime. The charges were dropped because the police decided that Dodd was a nice kid. He agreed to go to therapy, but dropped out after 2 months. He enlisted in the Navy to avoid prosecution for sex offenses. He was dishonorably discharged 2 years later for disciplinary issues. The punishable offense involved him approaching 2 young boys and offering them money for sex. He molested them. They reported the incident and he was arrested by military police. After leaving the Navy, Dodd moved to Lewiston, Idaho, and lived with his father. During his time in Idaho, he had multiple sexual encounters with 2 sons of family friends. He was in more frequent contact with one of them in particular, on whom he performed fellatio. For this act, he was arrested, convicted, and served time in jail. His sentence was commuted to probation under the condition that he undergo counseling. He stopped going to therapy at the end of his probationary period. He said he was uncomfortable with attending the sessions because it was a group therapy model, and he felt uneasy discussing his aberrant sexual proclivities in front of other people. Dave Trimble questioned Dodd about his feelings regarding his history with sexually abusing children. Trimble, do you feel sorry for the molestations and sexual contact you've had with kids in the past? Dodd, yes, I do. Trimble, what do you think would help you to change your behavior? Dodd, I need therapy, more counseling. Trimble, do you feel that you might continue to hurt children if you do not receive therapy? Dodd, yeah, I believe that I would. Dodd said that these sexual incidents intensified more with every incident. Trimble, are you aware of the recent homicides in the Vancouver area involving young boys? Trimble didn't advise Dodd that he would question him about this subject. Dodd was caught off guard. Dodd, yes, I've read about them in the newspapers. Dodd insisted that he had no involvement with the murders of the Near brothers and Lee Assailey. Lieutenant Jensen chimed in. Jensen, there are numerous circumstances, Wes, which can implicate you as a likely suspect in these homicides. There had been no recent child killings in this area until shortly after you moved here. Jensen pointed out that Wes's home address was close to the residential neighborhood in which all 3 boys lived. Dodd, oh my God, I like kids. I love little children. I would never hurt a child. Dodd's hands were trembling. His voice was quavering. Jensen asked him what he remembered doing on Sunday, October 29th, the day of Lee Assailey's disappearance. Dodd said he was likely watching football on television. He was not able to provide them with an alibi. Dodd: I know I wasn't in Portland that day. I never go to Portland. Dodd told them he didn't travel far from his home because of car problems. Jensen: Look, you can't blame us for asking. Dodd: No, I don't. Jensen: Look, Wes, we have to clear you out of this. We have to prove one way or the other if you're involved. If you were me, what would you do? Dodd: I guess I'd talk to people who knew me. Jensen: What else? Dodd: I don't know. Jensen: How about searching your car and house? Detective Trimble and I would have to do that. You can make it easy by giving us your consent to search. Dodd: I'd have to think about that. Jensen: Talk to an attorney. Do you have a problem talking to us? Do you want an attorney present while you talk to us? Dodd: No. Jensen: Something's bugging you. It's obvious that there's something you possess that will implicate you in these crimes. Otherwise, you'd give us a consent to search. We're here to help you, Wes. You've got something hurting inside. Dodd sighed. He leaned forward. He bowed his head. Tears began to leak from his eyes. He was on the verge of a breakdown. Dodd: May I have some water? Trimble: Sure, I'll get you some. After Dodd was given his water, he told the officers, after some trepidation, about one of the keys on his key ring. He said it was used to unlock a briefcase he kept under his bed. He told them it was in the briefcase where they would find photos of Lee Assailey and various items related to the murder of the Near brothers. Jensen: Okay, Wes, let's go back to the beginning. Later, Trimble and Jensen continued their interview with Westley Allan Dodd. Dodd: I knew where David Douglas Park was and thought it might be a place where I could find a boy and get him alone. I'd been in the park about an hour and a half, maybe a little longer, and was walking down through woody trails when I found them near the center of one of the trails. They had their bikes with them. Trimble: Did you have any weapons at that time? Dodd: I had a knife, a fish fillet knife, underneath my right pant leg. Detective Jeff Sunby participated in this interview. Sunby: This fish fillet knife, can you tell me what it looks like? There's all kinds of those on the market. Dodd: It had a light brown handle. It was a 6-inch fillet knife, had a 6-inch blade. It was a long blade, a narrow, skinny one. Dodd was pressed for more details about the Near murders. Dodd: I walked up to him and said, I want you two to come with me. I made them follow me down toward the end of the park, off towards Anderson, and took the boys into the wooded area up off the trail. Told them I wanted one of them to pull their pants down. I said I wouldn't let them go till one of them did. By then, I'd been asking questions and knew Billy was 10 and Cole was 11. I said, one of you pull your pants down. Billy said him and pointed to his brother. Cole asked me why, and I said, because I told you to. So he did. I kept telling him everything's going to be okay, that I wasn't going to hurt him. Cole pulled down his pants. I did oral sex on him for a little bit, and then I let him pull his pants back up and turned to Billy and said, Okay, now I want you to pull yours down. But he said no and started to cry. So I told Cole to pull his pants down, which he did, and I had him turned so his back was towards me. I undid the front of my pants and pulled out my penis. I had intended to put my penis between his legs to simulate intercourse, and I couldn't get an erection, so I gave up after that. Refastened my pants and told the boys, Okay, there's one more thing. I pulled the knife out from under my pant leg. Billy was off to my right, about a foot off of me diagonally. Cole was off on my left, and I reached over and stabbed Billy with the knife. Then I turned to Cole and stabbed him 2 or 3 times. While I was stabbing Cole, Billy got up and started to run. He ran back down the hill to the trail and just started running up the trail towards Anderson. I ran after him and caught him, spun him around and stabbed him, 2 or 3 more times, and he ran back in the direction of the park again. Sunbee. So you ran back into the park? Dodd. I was running back up through the trails, and I had my car up in the parking lot by the ball fields. I stopped, decided I'd better go back to where I had the 2 boys together and make sure I didn't drop anything, leave anything behind that might identify me. Went back up, had a little trouble finding the spot. Then I saw Cole laying there, and I knew he was dead. His eyes were open, his head was to the side, and he wasn't moving at all. It almost made me sick. I thought, well, I really cut him up pretty bad. I thought his intestines or something was hanging out. Then I realized that he never had a chance to pull his pants back up. At least that's what I think happened, but I didn't really look that close. I was more interested in making sure I hadn't lost anything more. There were a lot of people that saw me there. Trimble. Where was the knife at when you ran out of the park? Dodd. When I was running, I was carrying the knife in my hand. When I started walking, before I walked up the trail back into the main part of the park, then I put it back underneath my pant leg, into a sheath I had for it. I noticed there didn't seem to be too much blood on the knife, and I thought about just leaving it there. Then I figured, no, there'd be fingerprints. When I got home, I wrapped it up in a bunch of paper and ended up throwing it away. Sunbee, do you remember where you threw it? Dodd. In a big garbage bin at work. I ended up taking the knife to work with me on the Wednesday morning after the incident and dumped it in the garbage dumpster out there. The dumpster gets dumped anywhere from 2 to 3 times a week, and I knew nobody'd find the knife there. Trimble. Why did you feel that you needed to kill the boys? Dodd. So they wouldn't be able to identify me. When Cole pulled his pants down, I knew I wouldn't be able to let them go. Trimble. Did you keep anything that they had with them? Dodd. No. Trimble. Nothing at all? Dodd. No. Trimble. Did you keep the newspaper articles about the murders? Dodd. I kept all newspaper articles that I found about it. Trimble. Where are they now? Dodd. They're in that briefcase in my apartment. Trimble. Do you remember what you were wearing that day? Dodd. I had on blue jeans, had a t-shirt, I think. I don't remember for sure. Jensen. Do you ever wear a hat? Dodd. I did have a hat on. Jensen. Do you remember that hat? Dodd. I've got 2 hats. They're both blue hats. One says, "Don't worry, be happy," on the front. The other one, I don't remember what it says. They've both got some white and red lettering on them. Jensen. What about Lee Assailey? Dodd. When we got home, I told him to take off his clothes. At first he said no, and then I said, yeah, you have to. I wasn't talking angry with him or anything. I was trying to keep him calm. And when I said, well, you have to, I pulled off one of his shoes. At that time, he started taking off his shirt, and I finished taking off his other shoe and socks. I put all of his clothes aside and had him lay on the bed. I've got a Polaroid camera, and I took some pictures of him. Trimble. Where are those pictures now? Dodd. They're in the briefcase in my apartment. Trimble. What was Lee wearing that day? Dodd. He had been wearing blue pants, a white t-shirt that had some writing of some kind on the front. He had brown, almost moccasin-like shoes. a sweatshirt that zipped partway down the front, gray and red, I think. Had him on the bed, took some pictures of him, and told him, "Now I'm going to teach you how adults make love." I kissed him a few times and had him kiss me back. After I took the pictures of him, I had taken my clothes off too. I let him get underneath the covers in bed, and I got in underneath with him. And that's when I kissed him. Well, then I had him roll over on his stomach, and I pushed the covers back off the bed and put my penis between his legs and started simulating intercourse with him. I had him roll over onto his back and kept on with the intercourse that way. When I was done, I cleaned him up. I cleaned him myself up and let him get dressed again. Jensen, when you said you cleaned up, does that mean you ejaculated on him? Dodd, yeah, I ejaculated on him and I cleaned him up. In fact, I told him beforehand that in a little bit some white stuff was going to come out, and I was going to let it come out on him. Jensen, did you ever have to restrain him in any way to keep him from moving about? Dodd, no, right after I got him home, I tied him down just to get pictures of him being tied up, and then I untied him right away. Jensen, explain that to me. Dodd, I had ropes tied to the corners of the bed, and I tied these around his ankles and wrists, and I took a picture of that, and then I let him go right away. I had told him that I was going to do that beforehand. Trimble, what kind of rope did you use to restrain him? Dodd, it was just a small cotton rope that I used, kind of like the type you make a clothesline out of. It was a pretty small diameter, made out of cotton. Dodd mentioned taking Lee to Kmart and McDonald's. Trimble, did Lee ever ask you to take him home? Dodd, there was one time that he said, "I want to go home now." It was after we had been to McDonald's and we had gone back to my apartment. And I said, "Aren't you having fun? I thought you were going to spend the night with me." And he said, "Oh yeah," and forgot about wanting to go home. Instead, he wanted to stay up all night. I poured myself a cup of coffee and set it on the desk where Lee was drawing pictures. He knocked the cup over and spilled the coffee on himself. It was real hot coffee, and he started grabbing his shirt, and I told him to take it off. I helped him get his sweatshirt off and noticed that his chest was red. It did burn him a little bit, so I got a cold, damp rag to put on his chest and had him lay on the bed. Dodd indicated that he gave Lee one of his own t-shirts to wear while the other dried. As Dodd watched television, Lee drew pictures. Dodd, he was wanting to stay up all night. He said that he did that at home sometimes. He talked for a while, said that his mom had gone away. When I asked him if he lived with his mom or dad, he started talking about the mail lady and how nice she was. Finally, at about 10 or 10:30, I told him that it was time for bed. He kept arguing that he wasn't ready for bed, that he didn't have any pajamas to wear. I pointed out that he had my t-shirt on and that it went all the way down to his knees, and said that he could just use it for his pajamas. I asked him if he wanted to sleep in the bed with me or if he'd like me to get a sleeping bag out for him, and he said, "No, that's okay. He'd sleep in the bed with me." I'd have probably made him sleep in the bed anyway. About 5:30 in the morning, it was getting close to time for me to have to get up and get ready to go to work. Lee was on his back sound asleep. I moved him towards the center of the bed a little bit. He had his legs together. I was lying on my left side facing him, and his right arm was pinned between his body and mine. I put my right leg up over his legs to hold him down. I put my left hand up around his head and held his left hand down, and with my right hand, I started choking him. I started getting tired, and he was still struggling a little bit. He got his legs free and was trying to use his legs to push him away from me. My right hand was getting tired, so I started using both hands to choke him. He got his legs free and was trying to use his legs to push away from me. My right hand was getting tired, so I started using both hands to choke him. He finally quit struggling, and I let go. I decided to see if that CPR stuff really worked, so I blew into his mouth once. I decided, no sense doing that. Anyway, he'd lay on the bed and he started breathing again. I had thought that he was dead, but he wasn't. He was having some trouble breathing, but he started breathing. So I took a piece of that rope and wrapped it around his neck a couple of times and pulled it tight. Holding the rope, I pulled him up onto my lap to keep him upright. I kept choking him with the rope. His chest, was still heaving a little bit. I figured I'd probably been trying to choke him for 2 minutes or so already. I didn't know how much longer it was going to take, so, using the rope, I carried him over to the closet and tied the end of the rope around the clothes rack. I left him hanging there, and I took a picture of it. I went and used the bathroom, and about 10 minutes later, came back and cut him down. I set his body up on the shelf in my closet. Trimble, in what position? Dodd, in kind of a sitting position. He had his knees up to his chest. He was in a small area of the closet, a real narrow closet, and he was kind of leaning over against the side and back walls. I got ready for and went to work. Dodd continued. He said that the only thought he had during the day at work was returning home so that he could have anal sex with Lee Assailey's body. I got home probably a little bit after 4 that afternoon, took his body down out of the closet, and noticed that he was real stiff and cold and purple. Laid him on the bed, took a couple of pictures, loosened up his legs so that I could lay him down on his stomach, and then I put on a condom and had anal sex with him, with his body. Afterward, I cleaned up, took a shower. It must have been about 7 or so when I put his body in a couple of garbage bags and carried him out to the car. I'd never been out to Vancouver Lake, but I drive past a sign every day on the way to work that says public fishing, and I knew the lake was there. I drove out there, found the sign, drove out the road. It was dark, and I realized it was a dead-end road. Pulled over, took him out of the car. It was dark, so I left the headlights on so that I could see where I was going. Walked out into the brush a few feet, dumped his body out of the bags, got back in the car, and left. Trimble. Were there any other cars down there? Dodd. No, I didn't see anyone else down there at all. Jensen. Were these garbage bags new ones, or had they had stuff in them before? Dodd. They were brand new ones. Jensen. What condition was Lee's body in when you left it? Dodd. He was face up, purple. His arms were still stiff. I had loosened his legs a little earlier. Trimble. What was he wearing? Dodd. Nothing. He hadn't worn anything since I pulled his pants off right after he went to sleep. Trimble. What did you do with his clothes? Dodd. My landlady has a burning barrel out behind the house, and I put a box of newspapers in it and burned the clothes. I kept his underwear. Trimble. Why did you keep his underwear? Dodd. For masturbating. Trimble. Where is it now? Dodd. It's in my briefcase. Trimble. What did you do with the rope? Dodd. I burned that too. Trimble. Did you keep the newspaper articles about Lee's disappearance? Dodd. Yeah. Trimble. Where are they? Dodd. They're in the briefcase also. Trimble. Did you keep a diary of your activities? Dodd. Yes, I did. Dodd informed the investigators that the diaries contained highly detailed accounts of the murders. Trimble. Where is it now? Dodd. In the briefcase with everything else. A fax arrived from the Seattle Police Department. It listed all the offenses in Westley Allan Dodd's criminal record. He was questioned about his criminal history with an emphasis on his sex offenses. When this was presented to Dodd, he didn't deny that he was guilty as charged. He described a period of his life when he moved in with his sister and her husband. They were managing an apartment complex. Dodd was hired to work as a security guard at a construction site on nights and weekends. He described an incident that occurred on June 13, 1987. Dodd: there was a motel next door to the construction site. It had weekly and monthly rates, and there were a lot of kids living there. One little boy, I believe he was about 7, wandered to the construction site. I was walking around one end of the building at the far end of the site, and I saw him fall. It looked like he had hurt himself because he stayed down on the ground. I ran up to him, helped him get back on his feet, and made sure he was okay. The next day he came back and thanked me for helping him, and wanted to know if there was anything he could do for me. I told him no, there wasn't anything that I needed. The next day I was off duty, but I went back up to the site knowing that he would be there. I had intentions of getting him into one of the vacant buildings and molesting him. I was going to take the boy out into the woods, several miles away, rape him, and then I was going to kill him. Dodd said he already selected a location to kill the child, and that it was the first time he planned on killing one of his victims. The kid outsmarted him, as Dodd put it. He knew that something was wrong, and used his story of going to get toys for the boy that I was supposedly looking for to get away. He was initially charged with attempted kidnapping, but his lawyer procured a plea bargain, and he was instead charged with unlawful detainment. He spent 3 months in jail and was put on probation for a year. He was assigned to therapy sessions for as long as he was on probation. As usual, he quit as soon as the probation period ended. Trimble: okay, did you know what you were doing was wrong? Dodd: yeah, I knew it was wrong. Trimble: I mean, what made you know it was wrong? Dodd: doing something like that to a kid? I just knew that it was wrong. You hear about it on the news, TV, and everything all the time. I knew that it was wrong, and it would stop me for a while, but after a while things started building up again. Stress, things on the job, things just not going good, and after a point, I couldn't really control myself any longer. Trimble: would you have done these things if someone had been there to watch what was going on? Dodd: nope. Trimble: what kinds of things did you do to avoid getting caught? Dodd: I would try and make sure I was in areas where there was no one else around, like I did with the Near boys at David Douglas Park. And with Lee, I didn't see any other adults around at all, so I walked up and talked to him. Trimble: you said earlier, in both cases, that you destroyed some evidence or got rid of what was used. Was that to avoid getting caught? Dodd: yeah, that was in case anything happened. There wouldn't be any evidence. Trimble: what did you do to resist the impulse to do this on other occasions, like when you didn't kill? Dodd: when I have the impulse to do something, maybe I didn't go through with it because maybe I had worked overtime, or had other plans that I didn't want to back out of, afraid that if I did, someone would say he didn't show up for this or that. Working overtime meant less daylight time to go out and try to find a boy or something. Sometimes masturbation worked. Trimble: when you told us about telling Lee that you were going to have to kill him in the morning, had you already come to some decision at that time about what you were going to have to do to him? Dodd: yeah, I had to go to work and I knew I had to show up and I couldn't just leave him there. He was a bright kid. He could identify me. So, to kill him was the only thing I could do. Jensen: did you consider maybe you could drive him back to Portland or anything like that? Dodd: I had thought about it, and I thought maybe I could drop him off somewhere near their playground where I found him or something, that somebody would see him and get him home right away on account of the conditions and everything. But, I decided, it was too big of a risk going back into that area. Jensen: too much of a chance to get caught? Dodd: Yeah, too much. Sunby: When did you decide that you had to stab Billy and Cole? Dodd: While I was doing the oral on Cole. I knew, that they'd tell, and with my record. The boys were shook up enough that the parents would know something was wrong, and they'd find out what happened, and then the boys could identify me. Sunby: Had you planned on that when you went into the park? Dodd: I thought it was a possibility that I might have to kill. I was hoping I'd go in and maybe find a boy that was willing and would cooperate, and then I'd just let him go and nothing would probably be said. I guess I was kind of ready for anything when I went in there. Sunby: Did you ever go back to David Douglas Park after killing the Near brothers? Dodd: No. Trimble: Did you ever go back to Vancouver Lake? Dodd: No. Trimble: Did you ever consider turning yourself in? Dodd: Yeah, I have. Trimble: Why? Dodd: There were a couple articles written about Lee. He talked about the mail lady, and in the article she had said how nice Lee was. I read that she said he was a special kid on her route, and that hit me kind of hard, and I thought about going to the Vancouver police then. A newspaper columnist wrote something, I don't remember who it was now, but he said something about "watch the beast" at the end of the column. I think reading those articles was when I started feeling guilty about it, and I thought a couple of times about going in. Jensen: Are you glad it stopped tonight? Dodd: Yeah. Detectives searched Dodd's room. They found the torture rack. Numerous books were placed on a shelf, many of them about parenting. The carpet was removed to obtain DNA samples. A roll of 35mm film was exposed but not developed, which they collected as evidence. In a copy of the New Testament, the phrase "Satan lives" was scrawled on one of the pages. This was nothing compared to what was discovered in the briefcase. It contained the following: photos of Dodd engaging in sex acts with Lee Assailey while Lee was still alive. Photos of Dodd indulging in necrophilia with Lee Assailey's corpse. Photos of a sexually aroused Dodd in the nude. Photos of Lee Assailey post-mortem, which included a shot of him hanging from a rope in Dodd's closet. The photos were so disturbing and repugnant, the detectives nearly vomited at the sight of them. Hair and blood samples taken were revealed to be a match for Lee Assailey's DNA. During his trial, details were read aloud from his diary. He referred to Satan as a, quote, "love God." He referred to his victims as the chosen ones. He indicated that he wanted to torture every child before killing them. He related in detail how he inserted a plastic tube into Lee Assailey's penis. His diary described the experimental surgeries he wished to perform on children. Should that have come to pass, he would have dismembered the children while they were still alive and conscious. This included removing their sex organs while they were alive and devoid of the effects of anesthesia. July 15, 1990. After 14 hours of deliberations, the jury decided that Westley Allan Dodd must be sentenced to death. He was sentenced to death on July 26th. His execution date was fixed at January 5, 1993. He did not appeal his sentence, but his attorneys did on his behalf without consulting him. He was hung on January 5, 1993. Thank you for listening to Human Monsters. Bye for now.